They called her a cursed Omega, until the Alpha King bowed before her in front of every pack alpha. Mira had scrubbed the same stone floor every morning for 4 years, and every morning she told herself the same thing. Keep your head down, keep your collar high, and nobody will look twice at you. It had worked, mostly. People in Ashwood Pack did not look twice at Mira. They looked once, saw the faint mark curling behind her left ear, and looked away fast, the way people look away from something they have decided is bad luck. She had been born with that mark. A thin, pale scar in the shape of a broken crown, tucked just behind her ear, where a fall of dark hair usually hid it. Nobody in the village could explain where it came from. The old women had their own answer, though, and they repeated it every chance they got. It was a curse mark. Omegas born with it, they said, brought ruin to any alpha who claimed them. 3 different men had once shown interest in Mira. All 3 had quietly disappeared once they learned about the mark. The last one had not even bothered to be quiet about it. He had laughed, right in front of her father, and said no amount of dowry was worth that kind of bad luck. After that, her father stopped trying to arrange anything for her. Mira did not mind, not really. She had made peace with a small life. She worked in the kitchens of the Ashwood Pack house, carried water, folded linens, and kept herself so unremarkable that most people forgot she existed at all. It was safer that way. Being forgotten meant being left alone. Then the invitation came for the summit. Every 10 years, the alphas of every pack in the territory gathered in one grand hall to renew old treaties, settle old arguments, and remind each other whose pack still held the most power. It was a tradition older than anyone could remember, filled with formal speeches, careful smiles, and quiet threats hidden inside polite words. Omegas were brought along too, though not as guests. They came as servants, pouring wine, carrying trays, refilling cups, and disappearing into the background the moment their task was done. Nobody expected to be noticed. Nobody wanted to be. Ashwood was sending 6 Omegas this year to help serve the visiting packs. Mira was chosen simply because she was reliable, quiet, and good at her work. She did not want to go. Crowds made her nervous, and crowds full of powerful alphas made her more nervous still. But saying no was not something an Omega in her position could do, so she packed a small bag, tied her hair back carefully to hide her mark, and traveled 2 days by carriage to the summit hall with the other 5 girls from her pack. The hall itself was larger than anything Mira had ever seen. Tall windows lined the walls, letting in soft afternoon light that caught on polished floors and long wooden tables set for a feast. Banners from each pack hung from the high ceiling, each one a different color, a different symbol, a different history. Servants moved quietly along the edges of the room, setting out plates, lighting candles, preparing for the arrival of alphas from 9 different packs. Mira kept to her corner, just as she always did. She filled cups when they were empty, refilled trays when they were bare, and made herself as small as possible in a room full of people who mattered far more than she did. It worked well enough. Nobody paid her any attention. Nobody ever did. Then the doors at the far end of the hall opened, and everything changed. Alpha King Corvin Vale walked in. Mira had heard stories about him, of course. Everyone had. He ruled over the largest and strongest pack in the territory, a man known for winning wars without needing to raise his own sword, for settling disputes with a single sentence, for being respected and feared in nearly equal measure. People said he was fair, but firm, kind, but distant. King who carried the weight of 9 packs worth of politics on his shoulders and never once let it show on his face. She had imagined he would be intimidating. She had not imagined the way the entire room seemed to shift the moment he stepped through the door, as if the air itself had grown heavier, more alert. Every alpha already seated straightened in their chairs without seeming to notice they had done so. Conversations quieted. Even the servants slowed their steps. Mira, holding a pitcher of wine near the back wall, did what she always did. She lowered her eyes and waited for him to pass. He did not pass. 3 steps into the hall, King Corvin stopped walking. The 2 alphas behind him nearly bumped into his back, confused by the sudden halt. For a moment, nobody understood what was happening. Then Mira noticed that his head had turned, slowly, deliberately, toward the corner of the room where she stood. Toward her. Her hair had slipped loose sometime during the afternoon. just enough to expose the small mark behind her ear. She reached up instinctively to cover it, but it was too late. His eyes had already found it, and once they had, they did not move away. The hall, usually filled with the low hum of conversation, went completely silent. Every alpha turned to see what had captured their king's attention so completely. Mira felt the weight of dozens of eyes settle on her all at once, and her hands trembled just enough to make the wine in her pitcher ripple. King Corvin crossed the room. This was not something that happened. Alphas did not walk toward Omegas, especially not Omegas who served food and cleared plates. It was Omegas who approached Alphas, Omegas who waited to be noticed, Omegas who stayed in the background unless called forward. That was simply how things worked, an order so old that nobody questioned it anymore. And yet here was the most powerful alpha in the territory, walking straight toward a serving girl in the corner of the room, while an entire hall full of pack leaders watched in stunned silence. He stopped in front of her. Up close, he was taller than she had expected, with sharp, tired eyes that seemed to have seen far more than his years should have allowed. He did not say anything at first. He simply reached out, slowly enough that she could have stepped back if she wanted to, and brushed her hair away from her ear. Mira did not move. She could not have, even if she tried. He studied the mark for a long moment, the way someone studies a message they have been waiting years to read. Then, finally, he spoke. "Do you know what this is?" His voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent hall as if he had shouted it. Mira swallowed hard. "A curse," she said, because that was the only answer anyone had ever given her. Something in his expression shifted, though she could not quite name what it was. Disappointment, maybe, or sadness. "It is not a curse," he said. "It is a lineage mark. It belongs to a very old line of Omegas, one that everyone believed had died out 3 generations ago." The pitcher slipped from Mira's hands. It hit the floor with a loud crack, wine spreading across the polished stone, but nobody moved to clean it up. Nobody moved at all. "That mark," Corvin continued, turning slightly so his voice reached the rest of the hall, "has not been seen in decades. The last Omega who carried it stood exactly where you are standing now, surrounded by people who decided what she was worth before they ever bothered to learn her name." A murmur finally broke through the silence. Alphas from different packs exchanging confused glances, whispering questions to one another. Mira barely heard any of it. Her heart was pounding too loudly in her ears. Then King Corvin did something that made the entire hall fall silent all over again. He knelt. An Alpha King, ruler of the strongest pack in the territory, knelt on the floor in front of a serving girl everyone in her own village called cursed. He did not explain himself immediately. He simply stayed there, one knee on the stone floor, eyes steady on hers, as if the weight of every rule he was breaking meant nothing at all compared to whatever he saw in her. "For 6 years," he said, his voice quieter now, meant more for her than for the crowd around them, "I was told this line had ended, that there was no one left carrying it. I stopped believing that the moment I saw you standing in this corner." Mira looked down at him, at the man kneeling in spilled wine in front of 9 packs worth of alphas who had spent their whole lives believing Omegas existed to serve, not to be knelt before. She thought of every door that had closed on her, every suitor who had walked away, every whispered insult she had learned to ignore because fighting back had never once helped. She did not cry. She had used up all her tears on people who deserved them far less than this moment did. "Get up," she said finally. He rose slowly, still watching her, and then turned to face the rest of the hall. Every alpha in the room was still frozen somewhere between shock and disbelief, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed. "Whoever still believes this mark is a curse," Corvin said, his voice steady and clear enough to reach every corner of the hall, "is welcome to explain that belief to me directly." Nobody said a word. The Ashwood Alpha, who had been half risen from his seat since the moment his king crossed the room, sank back down slowly, his face pale. He had known Mira for years. He had never once asked about the mark behind her ear, never once wondered why she kept her hair pulled forward, never once thought to question the story. Everyone simply repeated without proof. For the rest of the evening, the summit continued as planned, treaties discussed, agreements signed, old rivalries carefully managed with polite words and careful smiles. But nothing about the room felt the same. Every alpha present kept glancing toward the corner where Mira now stood, no longer trying to disappear into the background, no longer certain she was supposed to. King Corvin did not leave her side again that night. He introduced her, formally, to each pack alpha in the hall, watching carefully as they offered her the kind of respect they had never once considered offering a servant girl before. Some hesitated. Most did not dare hesitate long, not with their king standing beside her, not after what they had just witnessed. Later, once the feast had ended, and the hall had begun to empty, Corvin found her again near the same corner where it had all started. The spilled wine had long since been cleaned away, though Mira still remembered exactly where it had landed. "You don't have to go back to Ashwood," he said quietly. "Not unless you want to." Mira looked at him for a long moment, trying to understand how much her life had changed in the space of a single evening. 4 years of scrubbing floors and hiding her hair. 4 years of believing the mark behind her ear meant she was broken, unwanted, cursed. All of it undone by a king who had simply chosen to look closer instead of looking away. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted. "That's all right," Corvin said. "You have time to figure it out." It was not a grand promise. It was not the kind of dramatic declaration people expected from stories like this one. But it was honest, and after years of being told what she was without ever being asked, honesty felt like more than enough. Word of what happened at the summit spread quickly through every pack in the territory. Some people whispered that the old stories about the mark had always been true, just twisted over generations into something fearful instead of something rare. Others simply repeated what they had seen with their own eyes. An alpha king, kneeling before a servant girl, in front of every pack leader in the land, refusing to let anyone decide her worth for her ever again. Mira did not become a different person overnight. She still remembered every unkind word, every closed door, every suitor who had walked away without a second glance. But she also remembered the moment King Corvin knelt before her, the moment the whole order of things bent just enough to make room for someone like her. She returned to Ashwood only once more, to collect the few belongings she still called her own. The villagers who had once spat after her name now watched her carefully, unsure how to speak to a woman their king had knelt before. Mira did not ask for their apologies. She simply gathered her things, thanked the family she had worked for, and left without looking back. What came after was not perfect. Nothing ever is. But for the first time in her life, Mira walked forward without hiding the mark behind her ear, and nobody dared to call her cursed again.